Hello, my name is Emily Beynon and this video is the start of a brand new series here on my YouTube channel. In the next 5 videos, I'm going to share with you my 5 favourite flute books from which I work regularly. I'll share something about the book's background or structure. I'll maybe zoom in on 1 or 2 of my favourite exercises in the book and basically show you how I use it in my practice. The book I'm going to start with is Marcel Moyse's book 24 Little Melodic Studies. It was one of 32 volumes of studies which Moyse wrote for the publisher Leduc, spanning almost 30 years, starting 100 years ago this very year in 1921. Moyse himself had been very unwell with pneumonia and started by writing a collection of exercises and studies for himself to play to help rebuild his strength, stamina and form. His daily exercises book dates from that period. It offers an intense month-long program of all conceivable scales, arpeggios and chords. In fact, many or most of his books are geared towards virtuosity and finger technique, and sometimes he even rewrote virtuoso studies for piano and violin like the Chopin and Wieniawski etudes. But I think his most magical and powerful book is this little collection of deceptively unassuming melodies. The mere notes of them can mostly just be read straight off or take very little practice to get in your fingers. But the power lies in how you play them. Because Moyse wrote them as little exercises for strengthening our musical grammar muscle, if you like. Phrase lengths, bar structures, harmonies, tonalities, different attacks. They really do offer a wonderful opportunity for any flute player to dig deep and really analyse how we are playing, not so much what we are playing. Just start by playing whichever melody you've chosen to work on a few times for yourself to get the feeling of what it could be all about. I love the idea of starting a new melody with very little expression and each time you play it, allowing the music to reveal a little more of itself to you. A little bit like polishing a piece of wood to find the inner glow. I'll give you a list of 10 things to work through on each melody later on in the video. But for now, let's dive straight in and get started with number 1 and I'll try and show you what I mean. Let's start by taking a look at the tonality. We're obviously in C major here, but given those little sighing figures, the appoggiaturas in the 2nd, 4th and 6th bars, it has got a slightly melancholy overall feel. So what sort of tone colour would suit this melody? Perhaps something quite round and open, but leaving plenty of space to expand through all those little crescendos. And watch that you keep your tone colour even throughout each phrase. For example, in the crescendos in bars 7 and 15, take care not to squash the sound on the C's, B's and A's in the low register. They have quite a tendency to be a little too hard and over-focused if you're not careful. The composer gives us the tempo indication andante at a walking pace, so quite steady and poised, but with some forward movement. We're in common time or 4/4, so 4 beats in the bar, with the first being the most important, followed by the 3rd, then the 4th, and finally the 2nd. Now, if that seems desperately obvious, just enjoy reminding yourself of these little grammatical rules, and it really will help you as a starting point for clearly phrasing more complex music later on. In terms of the phrase architecture, we have a very classical structure here. 2 8-bar phrases, and within each of those we have 2 short phrases of 2 bars, and the 3rd phrase is a longer 4-bar phrase. Short, short, long. So far, so simple. These are what I call the macro phrases, looking at the big picture. The first 8-bar phrase is clearly going towards the first note of the 8th bar, that's given to us by the composer. But in the second 8-bar phrase, we have a much longer high point, if you like. So instead of the climax being that single note, in the second main phrase, the peak is much wider and longer, stretching from, well, pretty much from bar 14 right through to that last sighing appoggiatura in the very last bar. And that second big high point is the one place where Moyse doesn't give us a beat's rest to breathe. So it's a good exercise for either strengthening and stretching your lungs to be able to do those 4 bars in one breath, or you could use it to practice a fast, inaudible breath on the bar line between the F and the E. Similarly, search for a way to continue the music across the rest in bar 6 and create a 4-bar phrase so that we avoid 4 2-bar phrases. If you're not quite sure what the phrase structure of any given melody might be, then start by trying to find the skeleton of the music, the bare bones, if you like, underneath the flesh of all the notes. So speeded up, the skeleton of this melody might be something like this. G, E, D, G, F, E, C, G, F, E, C, A, G. But don't worry, it's not an absolute science, this. Sometimes I even change my mind about the skeleton a little as I explore deeper into the melody and realise that some notes are perhaps not as important as I initially thought. But the more non-essential notes you can eliminate in this process, the more clearly the underlying phrase structure will appear. Now let's zoom in on the very first microphrase, those first 2 bars. And here the mini high point is obviously the first note of the second bar, as clearly indicated by the composer. So we need to show that the second E is more important than the first, but we don't want to kick it too strongly as it's only marked piano and it's only the start of this 8-bar journey. So I would suggest a little release of the sound over that first bar line so that we can show clarity without any sense of aggressive articulation. It's almost as if the first E ends with a closed mouth consonant, an M. Then the second bar starts with perhaps a P or B rather than a strong T. He came from Paris. So we can also underline this microphrasing with an increase in the amount or the amplitude of the vibrato. Or you might like to use this as an exercise for keeping a constant vibrato through the whole phrase and not being influenced by the dynamic. Or perhaps even as a study for just adding vibrato on the high point. You see, there are so many ways of using and practicing these lovely little melodies. Now let's look at the fingers and how we connect them with the air to polish that legato. There are a few places where we need to be especially attentive. For example, in the very first bar, when we go from the C when almost all the keys are open to the E where almost all the keys are closed. Make sure that the finger legato is just as good and smooth as the legato and the connection in the air. You'll see that Moyse occasionally gives some tips as to how to practice a melody, and most of the melodies have variations too. So if there are no written hints or tips, you might find that the variations offer some clues. So in this first melody, we see that those soft bell-like repeated notes, like the one over that first bar line, are obviously a focal point for Moyse. And they're an incredibly useful skill to have in your repertoire of different kind of articulations. And before we go on, do make sure that your intonation is impeccable. That E in bar 4 will have a tendency to be too flat. Anyway, it's rather a sad note and it's in a diminuendo. And the C in the following bar might be in danger of being a little too sharp. So going through the melody with a tuning machine might be quite an interesting and revealing exercise. Moving on further, in number 2, we see that Moyse might be encouraging us to maintain the integrity of the 3/4 bar by making sure that the first note really sounds like the most important note. Take care that it doesn't become dominated by the second beat, which is higher, a little more brilliant, but should actually, within the hierarchy of the bar, sound weaker or lighter and more lifted, if you like. In number 3, Moyse invites us to give a short note a lot of energy, or vibrato, and the long note a slower, more gentle attack, again ensuring that the rhythmic integrity is maintained and it doesn't start to sound as if we're playing upbeats. In number 4, we can focus on the portato articulation, staccato, legato, and also making sure it sounds like a proper 3/4 and not 6/8. Number 5 is in 6/8 and is all about a boisterous, bouncing staccato in B flat. Number 6 is a beautiful singing melody in G minor. You can come back to these melodies time and time again, continuing to explore and refine and remind yourself of our musical grammar. They make a wonderful counterbalance to Moyse's finger technique books, and I like to spend a day or perhaps 2 or 3 on each melody, really seeing what I can discover and polish in each study, just allowing myself to really listen carefully and hone my phrasing and shaping skills in all the various articulations, characters, colours and dynamics. If you're stuck for ideas, I would suggest the following steps for exploration. Step 1. Analyse the phrasing, both the micro and the macro of each melody. Step 2. Think of the shape, the direction and the high point of each of those phrases, and adding words at this stage can sometimes really help. Step 3. Think of the character and the colour of each of the 24 different keys. Transpose each melody into other keys and registers to find the true character of the range and tonality that Moyse chose. Step 4. Show the meter clearly, whether it's 2/4, 6/8, 4/4 or whatever, and be sure to be true to the rhythmic integrity of each melody. Step 5. Show the skeleton in both the melody and the variations, and try and figure out a possible harmony underneath to give you an understanding of which notes fit with the chord or are appoggiaturas. By the way, Trevor Wye and Robert Scott have made a lovely piano accompaniment for this book, and I'll put the link in the description box below to where you can buy it. Step 6. Check your tone colour is even throughout each phrase and make sure that you are in control of which colour you use and not the flute. Step 7. Check that legato is really smooth, both in your sound and your fingers. Step 8. Make sure that your vibrato goes with the shape of the phrase and reinforces all the points that we've talked about before. Step 9. Pay attention to the written dynamics and, of course, your intonation within the various dynamics. Step 10. Use each melody to perfect different kinds of attacks, be it repeated notes or bell tones, tongue out or whatever. But above all, remember to find the pleasure, the charm and the joy in these little musical gems. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode of my 5 favourite flute books. See you next time.